This video contains references to the term patriarchy. As always, you are free to interpret things in any way you choose. However, in the context of this video, the reference denotes the biblical patriarchy or any hierarchy ruled by a father figure who bears certain responsibilities for certain people. This thumbnail says enough already, and the title of the video is another preachy, pretentious A24 film, and the opening line of the video is,
"I should have known better."
That video has 48,000 views and the channel has 218,000 subscribers. Now don't get me wrong, I get it. This guy has a big channel and when a movie doesn't work for him, obviously his audience is going to trust that. And when he says enough already, they nod along because it could be comforting having someone confirm your confusion is valid. The problem is in the movie and not you. But here's what I couldn't shake after watching his review. I had to watch Men 4 times, and during the 4th time, I had to freeze a single frame and sit with it until everything clicked. And after it did click, it changed the way I saw all of it. Not about Cody Leach, about this movie, and about how something can look like preachy male bashing on its surface, but actually be saying something far more complex and painful and deeply personal. So today I want to do something a little different by acknowledging how people like Cody felt about Men, but more importantly, I want to show you what I found when I chose not to make snap judgments in order to get my review out before everybody else's. And instead, I took the time to ask myself, what's Alex Garland trying to say with this film? Today we're decoding a film that many people dismissed as shallow or preachy, and on first glance it does feel like it collapses under its own weight, but when you look closer, it turns out that collapse is actually the point. And for anyone who's ever blamed themselves for something that wasn't their fault, what this film is doing might hit closer to home than you'd expect from a preachy, pretentious A24 movie. And we're gonna focus on one detail I think everybody missed. It's a detail that suggests this movie's emotional message was there all along, but as I'm about to show you, it's not always an easy thing to look directly at. Let's start with the undeniable. Alex Garland is a director of immense visual intelligence. Working with cinematographer Rob Hardy, he creates a countryside that is simultaneously lush and claustrophobic, and beautiful and threatening. The UK countryside doesn't usually look so inviting or more capable of eating you alive. They introduce Harper's rented vacation home with the idyllic, inviting warmth of a postcard. There are stone walls and a symbolic apple tree and a tunnel through the hillside that promises mystery. But Garland's camera never lets us settle into the holiday. The compositions are always slightly off, and that makes the tranquility feel observed. This is not the dark, spooky, cobwebbed horror houses of James Wan. This is psychological horror rendered through visual language, and it is rendered masterfully. As Harper, Jessie Buckley delivers a remarkably nuanced performance. She modulates between terror and exhaustion and defiance with a precision that grounds the film, even as it gradually spirals into absurd abstraction. If you watch her face in the early scenes, you can see grief sitting just beneath the surface. She's wearing the face of somebody who's learned to smile through discomfort, the way we've all had to do at times in our own lives. Buckley seems to understand something the film itself seems to forget at times. Harper's interiority is the only window we have into this story. What's going on inside her head is what's supposed to be guiding us. By playing every male role in the story, from the creepy landlord to the cruel vicar, and the oblivious teenager and the ominous naked monster, Rory Kinnear creates an uncanny effect that visualizes Harper's experience of men as one big interchangeable threat. They're all different ages and different personalities, and they inhabit different social roles, but with one face between them, it is technically astonishing and deeply unsettling in its messaging. The first 2 acts of this movie are genuinely scary, particularly from a female perspective for obvious reasons. The 2 scenes that made me see this film differently both happen in the 2nd act. The vigor scene is a masterclass in manipulation through implication. Nothing he's saying is overtly threatening, it's all suggestion. And within that suggestion lies everything women are told they're imagining, but it also contains something rather sneaky. The tunnel sequence with its echoing voice and the figure emerging from the darkness is one of the most effective horror moments in modern cinema, and we'll come back to both of these scenes shortly. Garland understands dread. He understands how to generate negative space. He understands how to make suggestion more terrifying than spectacle. And that is what makes this movie so fucking frustrating. The problem with Men is not its ambiguity. The problem is that the ambiguity is not earned. Garland is attempting to explore at least 3 major thematic threads at the same time. Theme 1. Patriarchal violence. The film is explicitly about a woman who escaped a toxic, abusive marriage. Her husband struck her during an argument, then he threatened to kill himself if she left, and then he followed through. Most people pick up on the idea Garland's telling us the men in this story represent the face of the worst aspects of men's behavior. But if you watch very closely, every man she encounters in the village replicates some aspect of her husband's toxicity. There is entitlement, there is blame, there's projection, and ultimately, undeserved punishment. Theme 2. Grief and guilt. Harper isn't just fleeing abuse, she's grieving a death she feels responsible for. The film returns obsessively to images of things falling, from apples dropping off the tree to his body dropping from the balcony above. And that turns gravity into a metaphor for inevitability, which helps us in the audience feel the pull of guilt. And I caught that one on my first viewing. So woohoo! And theme 3 is myth and consciousness. Garland piles on the pagan imagery with the Green Man and the Sheila Nagi, alongside separate Christian symbolism with the apples and the garden and the church itself. The implication being we're watching something cyclical, or something archetypal, or something about the nature of being alive and consciousness itself. These men aren't just individual threats, they are manifestations of something ancient, and as such, they are in Garland's view inevitable and inescapable. Any one of these themes by themselves could anchor a brilliant movie, but using all 3 at the same time doesn't add extra richness to the project. It dilutes each of them, and that leaves your imagery looking murky, especially if you try reviewing the movie as fast as you possibly can. The Green Man is visually striking, but how does it relate to Harper's specific situation? The Sheila Nagi imagery also appears, but its significance for viewers unfamiliar with pagan iconography is essentially zero. Garland seems to be assuming here placing symbols on screen generates meaning automatically, but you have to integrate them into the narrative, and that brings us to the emotional heart of this story, or rather, its apparent lack. Based on everything Garland has shown us, the film's most coherent emotional core is Harper's suppressed guilt. Because if you watch closely, the primal fear the movie's tapping into isn't just a fear of male violence, it's the fear Harper might deserve what's happening to her. It's the fear that that voice that's blaming her, the voice of every man she speaks to in this village, the voice of her dead husband that she's internalized, might be right. The idea you are complicit in your own emotional destruction is genuinely disturbing psychological territory, as though trauma doesn't just happen to you, but through you, as you filter it and actively encourage it. And there are 2 specific scenes that combine to crystallize this idea. His speech is the key text. He's laying the immense weight of the Christian patriarchal myth onto her shoulders. The idea Eve was the first to eat the forbidden fruit means all women are seductive and deceptive and ultimately responsible for leading men into sin. He's using this notion to indirectly blame her for her husband's self-deletion. Or is he? He suggests her guilt is in wondering if he'd still be alive if she gave him the chance to apologize. She tells him to fuck off through gnashed teeth, possibly because his suggestion is absurd, but probably because that's exactly what she was wondering, and his question struck a nerve. And here's where this stops being a movie about just one woman, because if you've ever been in a relationship that left you questioning your own perceptions, where someone told you you're too sensitive or you're imagining things, or you're the one that caused the fight, that voice, it doesn't stay with them. It comes home with you. and it settles in. Before long, you don't need them to say it anymore because you are saying it to yourself. That is what the vicar scene is actually about. It's not just about patriarchal blame. It marks the exact moment that patriarchal blame gets internalized, and that's why his question upsets Harper so much. On the surface, this scene is straightforward. Harper walks through a beautiful abandoned tunnel. She plays with her echo, she finds sincere joy in it, and the exit is blocked by an ominous silhouette. So she retreats into the darkness. The obvious and possibly lazy interpretation becomes a woman's path to healing is blocked by a masculine threat. But look closer at the frame I spent 45 minutes with. Look at the outline of the figure. That's not the silhouette of a naked man. It's not the landlord's bulk or the vicar's flowing robes. That's a coat, and it's cut like the one Harper is wearing. What if the figure at the end of the tunnel is Harper? A lot of reviews, like Cody Leach's, dismiss this film as shallow male bashing, and I understand why. The men are terrible, but the idea Harper is her own obstruction changes everything. The film wouldn't be saying all men are monsters, it would be saying something far more painful, that when you've been hurt by someone you've loved, you don't just carry the memory of them, you carry their voice, and their doubt, and the blame they planted on you. And that voice becomes the thing blocking your way out of the tunnel. The men are still accountable, but this film's actually focused on what happens next, the part we do to ourselves long after the other person is gone. Consider what this does to the scene. Harper enters the tunnel seeking self-connection. She sings, and she harmonizes with herself. She experiences ecstasy in her solitude and the purest form of self-possession, and so she moves forward towards the light, towards the exit, towards healing. The expression, the light at the end of the tunnel, has never been so clearly utilized, and waiting for her there, blocking her way, is that little niggling voice of guilt. Can any of you relate? She's met by the version of herself that won't let her leave the past behind. That part of her that thinks she might deserve this. She has become the obstruction to growth we so often blame on others because it's easier to do when we're wounded. This reading makes the film painfully personal. The men are still there in the form of the endless Kinnear parade, and it still represents male toxicity. But that toxicity only has power because Harper is carrying it inside her. Within the tunnel, the external threats and her internalized guilt become the same thing. The men aren't just abusers anymore, they are manifestations of the voice in her head that's telling her everything is her fault. This explains why they keep coming and why they multiply and why the final birth sequence is so grotesquely generative. She can't kill them because she can't kill the part of herself that's giving them power. Yet, this explains the film's muddled strategy and the corresponding loss of fear on Harper's face towards the end. It also explains my initial inability to see what Garland was showing us. If Harper and the men are, in some sense, the same thing, if the threat is both internal and external simultaneously, the movie has to keep us locked in her perspective. And of course, the boundary between reality and what she's projecting is so blurry she can't distinguish between the two of them. So neither can we. The tunnel scene, read this way, combined with the vicar's speech, becomes the film's emotional crux. It's the moment Harper confronts and fails to get past the part of herself that blocks her own healing. The film's technical mastery creates the conditions for this recognition, the sound and the framing and the silhouette. It's all there. But here is the problem. You have to freeze the frame to see it. You have to scrutinize and interpret and project. The clues are embedded in the visual language of the film, but finding them requires the kind of frame-by-frame analysis most people either aren't interested in conducting or aren't able to. And even when you do find it, it's still just an interpretation. The film contains all the pieces of a coherent, emotional story heart. But they're hidden so far behind so much ambiguity, the heart never actually gets to beat on screen. It only gets to beat afterwards during my dumb little analysis. This is why Garland kept Harper underdeveloped. We know she feels grief and guilt, but the film withholds the specific texture of that guilt. We don't know what happened in the marriage. We don't know what caused the final fight. We don't even know if she was unfaithful. Her husband was obsessed with seeing her phone. And we don't need to know this to excuse her husband's behavior. We need to know it to understand her behavior. By keeping her history vague, Garland is aiming to mimic her interiority. He's asking us to project our own experiences onto her blank slate. But a blank slate can't anchor an emotional journey for an entire movie. And that leaves us trapped in Harper's perspective without any access to what is in her head. That means we feel the pressure on the character, but not the character who's being pressed. You might be wondering why any of this matters. It matters because Harper's situation is anything but rare. Blaming yourself for something you're likely innocent of, that's not a movie trope. That's a Tuesday night at a silent dinner table for too many people, especially those leaving toxic relationships. The loudest voice in the room is the one telling them they could have done more, or they should have been better, or they must have deserved it. Garland's created a horror film where the monster's not just out there naked in your garden, it's in here. And that monster is far harder to identify and way harder to kill. But there is hope, because Harper survives. The men keep on coming, but she keeps breathing. And the implication isn't that she's fixed, but that she's still here. And sometimes, that's all you can ask for. Which brings us to that notorious procession of men birthing men, the film's most divisive moment. If you accept my suppressed guilt rating, the scene makes total sense symbolically speaking. This is the violent birth of her guilt into the world. At this point in the story, her psyche can't contain it anymore, so she externalizes it in the most visceral way imaginable. The men aren't just appearing, they are being expelled. Hence, the sudden corresponding loss of fear on her face. For a horror film, this scene is incredible. The problem is, it's brilliant imagery slithering across the lawn in search of meaning. We don't know what's being expelled because we don't know enough about what's guilting Harper. The sequence generates revulsion, but not any insight. The ambiguity of the ending compounds these feelings. Harper walks outside, leaving the blood and the destruction behind her. She meets her friend, and we're left wondering if this weekend away has healed her, or if she's just surrendered to her guilt. And maybe that's why videos like Cody Leach's get tens of thousands of views. It's not because they're wrong, it's because they are being honest about what it felt like to watch a movie without a frozen frame and a fourth rewatch. It feels frustrating, it feels pretentious, and it feels like enough already. But here's what I keep coming back to. The people who need this movie the most, the ones who've blamed themselves for something they didn't do, who've carried a voice around in their head that doesn't belong to them. They might not end up watching the movie 4 times, and they might end up walking away feeling like Cody did. That makes me sad. I'm not sad about the film being flawed. It's that the film's emotional message is beating so faintly, so deep down that tunnel that the people who might recognize themselves in Harper may not ever hear it beating at all. The scariest horror movies are not the ones we can't understand. They're the ones that make us care so much about the characters. Understanding them becomes a second priority. Maybe it isn't about understanding Harper. Maybe it's about taking the time to sit with her for long enough that you recognize you're sitting with somebody you know very well. I'm Johnny Recaps, decoding fear, one movie at a time.